Many things happened after Midian was defeated. Gideon, who also took the name Jerubbaal, became a prominent figure in Israel, as we would expect. He began to marry many women and have many sons. And upon his death, it seems, his sons kind of shared leadership over the people, almost like a committee or a synod almost, or something. I don't know what you call it. But one of Gideon, Jerubbaal's sons, wasn't from one of his many wives. Gideon had also taken a concubine from the land of Shechem. And this concubine had also borne him a son. His name was Abimelech. Abimelech, the somewhat illegitimate son, if you will, those who were descended from a concubine were not as legitimate heirs as those who were descended from wives in their culture. Abimelech didn't really find himself very satisfied with this status. And so, since his mother was from Shechem, he approached the leaders of Shechem. And he said to the leaders of Shechem, "I'm one of you." Of course, again, his mother being from there. "Would you rather have 70 people rule over you, these 70 sons of my father? Or would you have one rule over you?" The people of Shechem said, "Why not? He is one of us. Better to have one leader than to have 70. Let's make Abimelech our leader." Abimelech took this as a mandate from the people and executed his 70 half-brothers, all on one stone. Or at least he intended to. One of them, named Jotham, managed to escape. The other 69 were, in fact, murdered on the rock. Jotham escaped, Abimelech took over, and began to rule over Shechem, and it seems, at least to some limited extent, over the people of Israel in general, as what we might call a judge at this time. Although, if there were anyone that you want to be a judge, definitely one who's committed 69 counts of manslaughter, or not manslaughter, murder, would seem to be not the best candidate. Jotham, upon learning that Abimelech has cemented his authority, he stands up on a hill to where people can hear him, but not close enough to where they can actually catch him. And he tells what we might call a parable. He says, the trees of the forest, they asked for a king to rule over them. They approached the olive tree and said, "Will you be our king and rule over us?" The olive tree said, I can't leave the abundance that I have, that I produce with my olives. I can't do that to be king over you. And so they approached the fig tree and said, "Be king over us." The fig tree says, "I can't leave my sweetness, my delicacies to rule over you." They approach the vine. The vine says, "I can't leave my grapes and wine to rule over you." And then they approach the bramble or the thorn bush. They say, "Rule over us." The thorn bush says, "If it is right for me to rule over you, then so be it. Enjoy my shade." Because we all know how shady a thorn bush is. "But if not, if it is not right for me to rule over you, then let fire go out from me and consume you and me as well." Of course, I'm paraphrasing the parable, but that's the basic idea. Jotham gives this parable, and he gives the interpretation. He says, if you have done right in killing the 69 sons of my father who saved you from Midian, if you've done right, well, enjoy your new situation. Enjoy the rule of Abimelech. Just have a wonderful life. If you haven't done right by my father, however, then may fire come from Abimelech and consume you, and may Abimelech be consumed by fire from you. And then as soon as he says this, Jotham scurries off because he doesn't want to get killed. And that's pretty much the last we hear. Abimelech continues to rule in spite of this annoyance, but the people of Shechem quickly turn on him and begin to dislike his rule. He begins slowly learning of this, but before he has learned all of it, it seems the people of Shechem devise an assassination plot against him. And they bring in an individual named Gael, And he begins to openly mock and speak against Abimelech in a feast in Shechem, saying, why is he going to rule over you? If he were here, I would take him down single-handedly. You know what happens at feasts when you have a conflict and people are drunk. Well, the captain, if you will, of Abimelech doesn't like what he hears, and so he devises a plan to set his own ambush. And they lead Gaal and many of the people of Shechem out, and all of a sudden, down from the mountains come the armies of Abimelech. And at first, Gaal sees these, and he says, "Oh, there's people coming to attack us." And the captain's like, "Oh, you're just seeing shadows in the mountains." Gaal says, "No, I see people coming to attack us." And finally, when they're close enough not to ruin the surprise, the captain turns and says, "Yeah, that's what you get when you cross Abimelech." Paraphrasing again, of course. So there's a battle. Gaal is driven away. His people are destroyed. But then the next day, Abimelech hasn't had enough bloodshed. The people of Shechem, they've been defeated now, and so they set out among the fields to go about tending the fields and doing their work. But Abimelech seems to think that they still need to be taught a lesson. So he sends more of his troops out, and they just start executing people in the fields. And he lays siege to the city of Shechem and manages to take it. He sows their fields with salt so that they cannot be used for crops. However, there is a smaller fortification within Shechem itself called the Tower of Shechem. This tower is very strong. And so about 1,000 of the citizens of Shechem who escaped from all the other carnage, they hole up in this tower. Abimelech is not deterred. He takes an axe and he chops down some wood. Ironically, given the parable that we heard earlier, he gathers this wood into a bundle and tells all of his men to follow his example. So they all also chop down some wood, gather it in a bundle. They set the wood all around the tower. And if you've ever seen The Patriot and that scene at the church, you know what happens next. They burn the tower around the people inside, and 1,000 inhabitants of Shechem are burned alive with fire. Of course, this is still not enough bloodshed for Abimelech. He wants to conquer more territory. So he next goes to the city, I believe it's pronounced Thefaz or Thefez. Pronunciations are hard. But he goes there and he begins to besiege this city as well. Well, they also have a tower. And so he, as they retreat into the tower, gathers another bundle and is going to try and do the same thing he did at the Tower of Shechem. Burn down the tower and burn everyone alive within it. No quarter. However, as he approaches to burn the tower down, this time he's not so lucky. A woman is standing at the top of the tower, and she takes a millstone. Not the big ones, they would take several people to lift. She takes the upper millstone. This is one that could be lifted by a single person, although it's still extremely heavy. And she manages to get it to the edge of the tower and drops it down. And it hits its target perfectly. It hits Abimelech so hard, even with whatever helmet and armor he may be wearing, that it literally cracks his skull. Now, he is not knocked unconscious, ironically. He is just conscious enough to know, A, that he's not going to survive this wound, but B, that he's not quite dead yet. So he tells one of his soldiers beside him, "I don't want it to be known that I was killed by a woman. Kill me. Finish me off, so that I died by your hand and not by hers." So Abimelech dies at the foot of the tower. The men who are with him, who see what has happened, well, he's the one who is egging them on towards further bloodshed. This is a lose-lose scenario for everyone at this point, so they all just go home. And thus, the author of Judges tells us, the curse of Jotham is brought upon both Abimelech and the people of Shechem. Nothing is left, we might say, but blood and fire in the wake of all these events. What can we learn from the story of Abimelech as always, when I say story, it is a true story, but it is told for us as a narrative, as something that people might tell their children around a campfire. Why? What's the point of this story? There are a whole lot of things in Scripture that are beautiful, that are encouraging, that are hopeful. This does not seem to be one of them. Nothing about this is pleasant. Nothing about this is good. Everything is just tragedy. Everything is blood and fire. What can we learn from the life of Abimelech? I propose a few things for us this morning. First of all, you might have heard this expression before, but I think it bears mentioning in this particular account. Hurt people hurt people. Now, what we mean by that is that those who hurt others often have been hurt themselves. And those who have been hurt often go on to hurt others. That is not a consistently true statement, meaning you are not forced, if you have been hurt, to hurt other people, and it is not an excuse if you have been hurt to hurt other people. However, this often happens. In fact, I think we could say more often than not. I want us to again consider Abimelech's situation. At the end of chapter 8 of Judges, before we really get the story of Abimelech, we're told Gideon had these 70 sons, his own offspring, for he had many wives, and his concubine, who was born in Shechem, also bore him a son, and he called his name Abimelech. Now, there's something we need to understand about Gideon as we see this end of his life. If you remember back in the beginning, meaning the beginning of Gideon's story, you remember what Gideon is doing when he is chosen to be the leader and the deliverer of Israel? He is trying to hide wheat in, I believe it's a well, so that the Midianites won't steal it. And an angel appears to him and says, I want you to be the deliverer of Israel. And Gideon says, I'm the least of the least of the least in Israel. I'm nobody. I'm the last person you should be asking to do this. Well, Gideon begins to act on faith, we are told. We are given his example of faith as an example, even in Hebrews chapter 11, the hall of fame of faith, if you will. He acts in faith. He begins to grow in his courage to take on this task that God has given him. Eventually, he does deliver Israel from Midian. But we're told a lot of things happen after that. For one thing, Gideon begins to fall to idol worship, the very thing that got Israel into the problems with Midian in the first place. He creates his own ephod, which was used in idol worship in this case, and he sets it up. It becomes a snare to him and his family, we're told. And this least of the least, who never had anything, seems to let his power and status go to his head. You see, wives at the time were status symbol, and it seems he can't get enough. It all takes over. He becomes corrupted by his own success that God gave him, not himself. And that's ultimately why he ends up with not only all these 70 sons and wives, but even an illegitimate heir, if you will, by a concubine. We see this thread several times through the Old Testament. Abimelech, you can imagine, does not have a pleasant childhood on any level. And I would argue, maybe due to many things, but primarily it is because of his father's lack of character. That doesn't justify what Abimelech does, as we've already seen. He acts wickedly. This is clearly intended to be a warning that we should not follow the path of Abimelech. But I don't think it's meant to be lost on the readers that none of this would have happened if Gideon would have maintained his character at the end of his life. Jesus would say in the Sermon on the Mount, whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. I want us to notice two things about the statement. Number one, this is the law and the prophets. He's not saying this is what's going to be true under my covenant, although that's also true, of course. He says that even the old law was meant to get people thinking along the lines of, I want to do for others what I would want them to do for me. Now I ask you, even in a time when God allowed things like polygamy, do you think that if Gideon really stopped to think about it, he would want someone to do to him what he did to his son by putting him in the position that he did? I don't think so. My lack of character can leave deep wounds that affect many generations to come. It's very interesting. I might have mentioned before, there's a history series I enjoy watching on YouTube. Something that often comes up, and it's kind of just comes up as a little, side joke or whatever. It's meant to kind of be humorous the way they tell the history. But it's always interesting to me. When he's discussing history and a lot of the dictators and tyrants that occupy much of history, almost always there's a little throwaway line in there about their childhood and how they were mistreated or, I would say, abused in a physical sense in terms of being beaten severely or things like that by their parents or those who brought them up. This was true of people like Stalin and Hitler, for example. I can't help but think that maybe if they had had loving families, they would not have gone on to do the horrific deeds that they did. And I can't help but think the same is true of Abimelech. And that's a warning for me, not from the perspective of Abimelech. I might not ever do the horrible things that Abimelech did, but if I don't treat someone else with kindness, with love, the wounds that I cause might provoke them to do even worse things than I could ever dream of in my life. Not that that's still not their responsibility, but I still contributed, and I don't want to do that. Second, without God, might makes right. You notice the common thread throughout our entire story this morning? Whoever had the biggest army, whoever had the biggest stone, they won. There was no sense of, well, this is the right thing to do. That's what Jotham tries to provide with this parable, but no one listens. There was only, do I have the might? Do I have the power to do what I want? That's what we're left with, without God. I want to remind us of the theme of Judges. The entire book is built around this theme. In those days, there was no king in Israel. This is repeated several times throughout the book. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's what happens when you don't have godly leadership. That's what happens when you don't submit to God himself. Everyone just does what they think is right. And when left to their own devices, what do we as human beings think is right? Well, whatever benefits the other person, right? No. If left to our own devices, we gravitate towards what's in it for me and what I can accomplish. And the only thing that gets in the way of that is if someone can stop me. But if I have power, I can't be stopped. And therefore, what I say goes. You know, Jesus would say, that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant. Friends, that has never been, in the history of humankind, the norm. The norm is always the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. And I would argue that will never be the norm. Because Christianity, as much as we hate to admit it, will never be in control of the world. The gate will always be narrow, and few there will be that go in by it. The way to destruction will always be broad, and the many will go there. But Jesus says, even though that's the way that the world overall works, you don't have to be that way. Even though the world as a whole will always be without God, you need to be different. When might makes right around you, you need to do right according to Him, not according to the morals of the world. It's ironic. I think Sam even left a pamphlet or two on the back table about this. Whenever you try and talk about right and wrong outside of God, you always end up with just nothing. Because there's no way to truly define right and wrong without God. Most people define right and wrong as like what's best for the many as opposed to the few, or something along those lines. Look at history, see how well that's gone. The only way that we have something besides might makes right is if we let God define what is right for us, is if we put others before ourselves. Self-interest is really the only true virtue in a world without God. I would argue that the story of Abimelech is designed, among many other stories in the book of Judges, to show us exactly where the world goes without God. When everyone is only interested in what's best for me, we get chaos. We get a very bleak picture. We get nothing but blood and fire. But thirdly, I want us to know something else. You were in a ship that was sinking. You control part of this ship. Let's say you control the area that has the fresh water. Someone else controls the area that has the food supplies on the ship. You're out in the middle of the ocean, right? You need food, you need water. Well, I want their food. They want the water that I control. So we fight about it. Well, guess what? If the ship is sinking, how much does it matter whether the food or the water is controlled by someone or another? No one wins a fight if the ship is sinking. The only way to win is to work together to stop the ship from sinking, and then we can talk about the food and the water, right? We mentioned this morning in class, whenever Jerusalem was under siege by the Romans in 70 AD, the Jews were literally slitting each other's throats. There is an enemy at your gates, and all you can do is kill each other from within. No one wins a fight on a sinking ship. I'm not going to name any names or anything on this, but I was recently looking at a post. It wasn't anyone here knows, I'm sure, but I was recently looking at a post by a member of the church who also is a politician. And they were posting a lot about different things about the election. They support the candidate that won, all these kind of things. They were going on about all this, and I couldn't help but think as I read it, you're so focused on the fight between left and right, Democrat and Republican, you're putting that before the fact that our entire ship is sinking because our country is not following God. Shouldn't our main focus, yes, I understand, there are important things to be considered in the world of politics. Shouldn't our main focus to be to stop our ship from sinking by sharing the gospel with our fellow Americans, than to focus on who wins the fight on the sinking ship? Zebul drove out Gael and his relative. Zebul is the captain, Abimelech's captain. All the people in Tower Shechem died. The millstone goes and crushes Abimelech's head. They all fought. Guess who won? Who won the entirety of the battles and wars and fights that we talked about this morning? Who won? Nobody. There was literally no winner in that entire mess. Unless you want to count Satan. Oh, he was cackling the whole time. Why? Because they were focused on the fight and ignoring the fact the whole ship was sinking. We go back to the Sermon on the Mount. Don't lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, where thieves break in and steal. Why would we focus on the things of this earth when we know we're not going to be here for hardly any time at all? Yes, we have responsibilities we have to take care of. I'm not saying just go and sit around and, hey, Jesus, we're ready for you to come back. That's not what we're talking about. I'm saying Where's our investment? What are we trying to do? Are we trying to get to where we're going? Or are we trying to do all we can to stay here, even though we know we won't stay here? He says, lay up treasures in heaven, where none of this happens. Those treasures can't be taken from us. Yes, we can focus on our wealth. Yes, we can focus on the political machinations of our nation. None of that lasts. All of that sinks with the ship. I want to be where I'm going. I want to be at port where the ship was headed. And the ship is going to do whatever the ship does. Would you rather fight battles that don't matter or win the only one that does? Again, I've told y'all, love history. You want to know something about every single battle I've ever stayed in history? It really hasn't changed the world. Not really. Oh, it's changed things about the world. But guess what? The world still struggles with sin. People still do wrong things. Innocent people still get hurt. Evil still corrupts. Not a single battle that has been fought over land and resources and petty vengeance has really changed any of that. There is one fight that can. And that is the good fight of faith that Paul talks about. That's the fight to share the gospel, to live the gospel, so that the fight that's already been won can be a fight that I join on the winning side. That's the only fight that matters. The tragedy of Abimelech, and it is a tragedy, I don't think any of us would argue with that. The tragedy of Abimelech is designed to show Israel that only Yahweh, God, that's the personal name for God in the Old Testament, only Yahweh offers something better than blood and fire. That's why we're here this morning. We want something better than that. We know that that's all the world has to offer, and we don't want that to be all that there is. But it's not just that we don't want it. We have seen that there is something better. We have seen, according to the inspired Word of God that He has revealed to us, that we don't have to settle for a world of blood and fire. That we can work toward a world of beauty and fellowship and love. Not this world. This world's going away. We get to be with our Father in heaven. But only if we serve Him. Only if we follow Him. Only if we abandon what we want for what He is guiding us towards. That's the hope. We mentioned hope this morning in the prophecies of Daniel. That's the hope that we have. Most people aren't in denial about the dismal state of the world, but most people stop there. Is it any wonder that people get depressed, get down, get anxious about the world? Because they think this is all there is. There's something better. God has prepared it. Christ has made it possible. We simply have to make the decision to follow. If this morning you are here and you want to make that decision, you want to commit your life to Christ, we encourage you. We ask you with joy in our hearts for what is possible. Not just for a few, but for anyone who will listen. Please make that decision today. Or if you are a Christian, you need prayers, you need encouragement to keep on fighting that fight. Whatever the need may be, please let us know so we can help you as we stand and sing.
Are you sowing the seed of the kingdom, brother, in the morning, bright and fair? Are you sowing the seed of the kingdom, brother, in the heat of the noonday's flare? For the harvest time is coming on, and and the reaper's work will soon be done. Will your sheaves be many? Will you garner any for the gathering at the harvest home? Are you sowing the seed of the kingdom, brother, whom the still and solemn night? Are you sowing the seed?